Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we are opening up a stack of source material dedicated to, well, probably the most consequential family in American corporate history, the Rockefeller. We're going to be tracing this phenomenal dynasty from a very obscure 17th century German all the way through the explosive era of American industrialization.
Right up to the center of 20th century politics.
Exactly.
And our mission here is, far more than just recounting a family history. It's really about unpacking the architecture of power.
Mm-hmm.
We need to analyze how John D. Rockefeller, the patriarch, managed to build what historians, well, they all pretty much agree, was the world's first genuine corporate monopoly.
A machine so powerful, it basically forced the U.S. government to invent new laws just to tame it.
It did. And then we'll track how 3 generations took that immense foundation of wealth and just systematically redefined American business, philanthropy, and culture.
And to start this massive story, we aren't going to start at the beginning. We're actually going to begin with the end of the beginning, this dramatic legal climax that sent shockwaves through, well, global capitalism.
Okay.
So let's unpack this moment. In May 15th, 1911, the United States Supreme Court delivers a ruling that dismantles the single most powerful corporation the world had ever seen.
It truly was an extraordinary episode, and it's one that remains, intensely relevant to modern debates about tech giants and concentrated corporate power.
Absolutely.
The case itself was really the culmination of years of political and public fury over the actions of Standard Oil, which John D. Rockefeller had established back in 1882.
And the timing here is so crucial. This wasn't just any company, right? This was the company that controlled the fuel that was replacing the old world.
Yes.
Petroleum was replacing coal in factories. It was providing the cheap kerosene that lit up homes across the continent. And critically, it was fueling the nascent automobile revolution.
Rockefeller saw oil's future before almost anyone else.
Mm.
And he built the infrastructure to exploit it. He was a logistical genius with this endless, relentless quest for efficiency and control.
And that quest, that's what resulted in the monopoly.
That's it. That quest resulted in the company acquiring virtual monopoly power, not just over the supply of crude oil, but over the entire pipeline, the transportation, the refining, the distribution.
Wow.
And when a company achieves that level of concentrated control, it becomes, functionally a government unto itself. It sets prices, it dictates terms.
And the public outcry just became deafening. By the early 20th century, the feeling was that the scale of concentrated power simply couldn't exist within a democracy.
Right. So the legal action began in earnest, starting with the state of New Jersey, which is where Standard Oil was actually incorporated.
And they used the Sherman Antitrust Act.
They invoked the Sherman Antitrust Act of 1890, which historically was the federal government's first real attempt to restrict companies from acquiring monopoly power.
A groundbreaking law.
It really was, and the Standard Oil case became its ultimate test.
Yeah.
So when the Supreme Court ruled that day in 1911, New Jersey prevailed. Standard Oil was decreed to be in breach of the Sherman Act, functioning as an illegal restraint of trade.
And the decree itself, the solution the court came up with, was just staggering.
It was.
The court ordered Standard Oil to be forcibly dissolved, broken up into 34 completely distinct and independent entities.
And when you factor in all the sub-companies and subsidiary holdings, the sources actually confirm that count rose to 39 successor companies.
39! That's incredible.
The fallout changed the corporate landscape overnight. And what's truly fascinating here is the sheer unimaginable scale of wealth that those 34 shards represented. These weren't minor companies.
Yeah.
They were foundational. If you look at the names today, you can trace them to global behemoths like Chevron, Amoco, which is now part of BP, and of course, most famously, ExxonMobil.
ExxonMobil, right. That's the product of a merger between two of those original successful.
Exactly.
And as of 2025, it's still the 13th largest company in the world by revenue.
Think about that.
The fact that the remnants of the original company are still among the world's corporate giant, it tells you everything you need to know about the scale of wealth and power Rockefeller had built up in that single corporate.
Before the government stepped in, it took one man, through sheer will and strategy, to aggregate that wealth, and it took the highest court in the land to dismantle it.
It's such a classic American story. Unparalleled success followed by this violent legal correction.
It is. But to truly understand that unique, almost tyrannical drive for control, we have to go back, way back.
Okay, so let's pivot far away from the courtroom drama and the oil fields, and let's explore the very deep and surprisingly unstable origins of this dynasty in part one, from German roots to American hustle.
The Rockefeller Dynasty, at its core, it's a German-American narrative. We can trace the family name back centuries, and it's rooted in this abandoned village of Rockenfeld in western Germany.
Where's that rough?
It's located about midway between Bonn and Koblenz. The surname was essentially just a geographic label, signifying where the family was from.
So the shift to the new New World starts in the early 18th century. Around 1723, a man named Johann Peter Rockefeller, who was in his early 40s, decided to immigrate to the English colony of Pennsylvania.
And we have to talk about why Pennsylvania was the destination.
Right, the context there is key.
Totally. It was founded as a proprietary colony in the 1680s by William Penn, who was granted the land by King Charles II. Now, Penn was a Quaker, a religious minority that was severely persecuted in England.
So he set up Pennsylvania as a haven.
A haven based on what was then radical religious toleration, that open, accepting environment which welcomed all sorts of diverse religious groups, including various German Protestant sects, was like a magnet.
And that's what drew the Rockefeller.
It encouraged thousands of German settlers, including Johann Peter Rockefeller, to make that journey from the Rhine Valley to America. Their story really starts with a search for religious and social acceptance.
Okay, so after the migration, the family's movements were, well, pretty typical for the time. Johann Peter briefly got some land near Philadelphia before moving to New Jersey.
And his son, William, married a cousin named Christina, whose family held land near a place called Germantown.
And this brings us to John D. Sr.'s grandfather, Godfrey Rockefeller. He was born in Albany, New York in 1780.
Now, Godfrey, despite being the patriarch of the American lineage, had what the sources describe as a surprisingly unsettled
What
life.
does that mean exactly, an unsettled life?
He was a true early American jack of all trades. He worked as a farmer, a small-time businessman, and he even served a spell as sheriff of Great Barrington, Massachusetts.
Okay.
That's where his wife, Lucy Avery, was from. So it suggests a kind of restless energy, but maybe not yet the focus you'd need to accumulate massive generational wealth.
And they had a large family, 10 children. And in the early 1830s, this branch of the family did that classic American thing. They started moving.
Right, toward the Great Lakes region. This was a critical time. States like Illinois and Michigan were undergoing this rapid settlement fueled by demand for new farmland and the expanding canal system.
And this westward journey brings us to maybe the most colorful and frankly most consequential figure of the pre-John D. era, William Rockefeller Sr.
Born in 1810, if John D. Sr. was the ultimate system builder,
Then William Sr. was the ultimate chaos agent.
that is a perfect way to put it, yes. He was John D.'s father. And the sources, well, they don't mince words. They call him much more nefarious than his own father, Godfrey.
So what was his deal?
He started out in honest work, maybe as a laborer or a lumberjack, but he very quickly transitioned into what we would now just call a professional con man.
A con man.
His specific hustle was selling botanical drinks, miracle cures, and supposed medicines all across upstate New York. He was, for all intents and purposes, a snake oil merchant.
Wow.
And he didn't just sell worthless stuff. He used the ill-gotten gains to buy land or invest in these wildly dubious schemes, always looking for a quick, dishonest win.
The duality here is just incredible. So it was during this hustler lifestyle in the mid-1830s that he met Eliza Davidson in upstate New York.
And this is where the German heritage of the Rockefellers mixes with Scots-Irish, because Eliza's background was among the Ulster colonists who had immigrated centuries earlier.
And the courtship story it's just bizarre.
It is the stuff of strange legend. The sources claim William, maybe as a way to seem mysterious or non-committal, pretended to be deaf and unable to speak when they met.
Wait, what?
He communicated with Eliza solely by writing on a chalkboard.
Get out of here. He pretended to be a deaf mute, and her family was okay with it.
It's an incredibly odd foundation for America, especially considering the Davidsons were a family of devout Baptists, focused on sobriety, moral uprightness, a total contrast to William's ethically dubious nature.
And yet they got married.
They married in 1837 and had 6 children. John Davidson Rockefeller, John D., was born the following year in 1839. And that D, by the way, stands for Davidson, the maternal surname, which was a common honor for the eldest son back then.
But that marriage was, it was doomed from the start. William Sr. was off and away on business, and the family life deteriorated quickly.
It did. In the late 1840s, he essentially abandoned them after getting caught up in a major scandal.
This was the assault charge.
Yes. The most notorious event was the charge of sexually assaulting a housemaid named Anne Vanderbeek. That charge forced William Sr. to flee the area and assume a whole new identity.
And he went on to live under this fantastic alias, Dr. William Livingston.
Dr. William Livingston. And despite never divorcing Eliza, he entered into a bigamous marriage with another woman, Margaret Allen, in 1856. He lived under this assumed name until 1906, surviving into his 90s, completely estranged from his legitimate.
So this chaotic hustler background, this has to be the key psychological driver for John.
It has to be. He grew up seeing firsthand the instability and, the potential ruin caused by constant fraud and ethical failures. What he sought was not just wealth, but absolute systematic control.
A way to inoculate himself against the chaos personified by his own father.
That is the core insight here. William Sr.'s fraudulent deals and his ethical recklessness essentially created the psychological framework for John D. Sr.'s own systematized, almost religious pursuit of business efficiency.
He didn't want a quick score.
He wanted an indestructible foundation, and that determination to never be reliant on the unstable whims of a con man father leads us directly into part 2, John D. Rockefeller and the monopoly.
So when John D. was born in 1839, the United States was still largely agrarian, mostly on the East Coast, only 24.
But the pace of change throughout his lifetime was staggering, and it set the perfect stage for his ambition. The U.S. population just exploded from 17 million in 1840 to 76 million by 1900.
And the country transformed from agricultural to this global industrial powerhouse.
And initially, that industrialization was powered by coal. But the great market opportunity, the real game change, emerged in domestic lighting.
Whale oil.
For decades, the primary source of lamp oil had been whale oil. But the global whaling industry had basically become victims of their own success. They were hunting whales close to extinction.
So the supply was drying up and the price was going.
Exactly. Ports like New Bedford, Massachusetts, which was the hub of the American whale oil industry, started to decline in the 1850s, leaving this huge hole in the market.
And petroleum, which had been known about for centuries but mostly ignored, suddenly emerges as the cleaner, cheaper, and far more sustainable.
This shift from whale oil to kerosene, that was the fundamental catalyst for the Rockefellers' rise.
So how did the young John D. position himself to take advantage?
Well, after his mother moved the children to Strongsville, Ohio, he took a short but very effective bookkeeping course. He started as a simple clerk for a grocery company in Cleveland in 1855, but he immediately showed this extraordinary aptitude for numbers and negotiation.
He wasn't just a clerk for long.
Oh no. He quickly moved from clerical work to negotiating directly with merchants bringing goods in via the Ohio and Erie Canal. He just understood logistics and pricing better than his boss. By the late 1850s, he was already dipping his toes into buying and selling petroleum products.
He saw the future.
He did. And then the American Civil War struck. Rockefeller, who claimed his pressing business affairs, prevented him from fighting for the Union.
Convenient.
Very. He used the war as a massive unintended catalyst. The conflict dramatically spiked the price and demand for petroleum, and he focused intensely on the oil trade. By the end of the war, he was already a prosperous oil merchant in Cleveland.
And then in 1870, he established Standard Oil of Ohio with a few key partners. He initially owned just over a quarter of the shares.
Right. And Cleveland was becoming this vital center for refining crude oil into usable products, mainly kerosene. His success was really based on two pillars.
Product and infrastructure.
You've got it. First, the product. Kerosene was economically superior to whale oil, so demand just kept growing. Second, infrastructure. The American railway system was expanding like crazy, and Rockefeller leveraged this. He negotiated secret cutthroat deals with the railroads rebates that let him transport his oil barrels nationwide far cheaper than any competitor.
Which let him keep his prices low and undercut everyone else. But the real story, the one that led to the 1911 breakup, is how he systematically acquired total monopoly control. We have to talk about the infamous Cleveland Massacre of 1870.
The term massacre is well chosen. It was a premeditated, ruthless campaign. Cleveland at the time had over 24 independent refineries.
24.
And over the course of just 4 months, Rockefeller, leveraging his secret railroad rebates to make transport costs unbearable for his rivals, bought up nearly every single one of them.
How did
He'd approach a rival, show them the figures proving Standard Oil could ship product cheaper than they could even produce it, and offer them a choice. Sell now for a good price, or be driven into ruin.
an offer they couldn't refuse?
Pretty much. This established his determination to achieve complete market dominance in the most aggressive way possible.
And here is the core, often missed insight. Rockefeller wasn't interested in dominating.
No, not at all. While prospectors, the wildcatters, were finding oil in Pennsylvania, California, and eventually Texas, drilling was high risk, high reward, and totally uncontrollable.
So why was refining the true choke?
Because oil is useless until it's refined into kerosene or gasoline or lubricant. Rockefeller realized the real power wasn't in finding the raw resource, it was in controlling the faucet after it was found.
He controlled the bottleneck.
Exactly. By the 1880s, Standard Oil was refining over 90% of the crude oil delivered into the American market for actual use. This control over refining, storage, and transport pipeline, it made them absolutely indispensable and gave them dictatorial power over the entire industry.
That control, coupled with his famous diligence, just propelled him staggering heights. He became a millionaire and eventually, reputedly, the world's first billionaire.
A number that, when you adjust for inflation, puts him in a class entirely his own. And his personality, it was shaped by the sheer, almost obsessive diligence, a relentless determination that often bordered on the tyrannical.
There's that famous quote of his, "I would rather be my own tyrant than have someone else tyrannize."
And that says it all, doesn't it? It suggests that avoiding the chaos and subjugation of his childhood, living under the instability of his father, was the core motivation. He pursued success bordering on cruelty, specifically to ensure he would never, ever have to take orders from anyone else again.
But the ruthless industrialist did mellow out a bit.
He did. As he aged, particularly after handing over control to his son, John Jr., he started to find other outlets for his obsessive energy. The sources highlight his late-life passion for golf, a sport just then emerging in the U.S.
He became so fanatical in his early 60s that he built his own private course on one of his estates, calling it Golf House.
It's a wonderfully human detail, isn't it? The man who created a global monopoly system, spending his retirement trying to perfect his short.
It is, and that narrative of relentless accumulation and eventual surprising domesticity, it sets the stage perfectly for the public record. This didn't happen in a vacuum, which leads us directly to part 3, the Gilded Age Reckoning and the Rockefeller.
The period roughly from the post-Civil War era to World War I is known as the Gilded Age. It was defined by the rapid emergence of incredibly powerful and wealthy industrialists,
who were quickly labeled the robber baron by their critics.
Exactly. And Rockefeller certainly stood on the shoulders of giants. You have Cornelius Vanderbilt, who monopolized steam shipping and then the railways.
Right. And Andrew Carnegie and Henry Clay Frick steel.
But Rockefeller's rise seemed to encapsulate the worst fears about industrial power. Because oil was becoming so fundamentally vital for the entire global economy, his concentrated control generated this intense public and political criticism, arguably more than any other figure.
He was the chief robber baron of the new fuel source.
He was. And this concentration of power led directly to the Progressive Era, a reform movement that sought to curb corporate influence. The Sherman Antitrust Act of 1890 was the first major legislative response.
And its successful application in the 1911 breakup of Standard Oil permanently altered the corporate landscape.
It did. Now, it's essential to recognize that John D. Sr. didn't operate alone. His brothers were also successful businessmen who either partnered with him or established their own significant enterprises.
Like his younger brother, William Rockefeller Jr.
Right. William was John D.'s close operational partner from the very beginning. He oversaw the Standard Oil operations in New York, which was the country's largest commercial hub. He managed sales, finance, and transport logistics.
But William Jr. also had highly successful independent ventures. He was an early financier of the Anaconda Mining Company.
He was. Anaconda focused on copper extraction, particularly in places like Chile. And under his guidance, it became one of the world's largest mining companies. It just shows that the ambition for industrial dominance ran deep in the family.
And there was a third brother, Franklin Rockefeller.
Yes. Franklin also worked within Standard Oil, but later had a falling out with John and William over a conflict of interest with another oil company. He did make his own contributions, though, specifically in developing new methods for sulfur extraction.
And the success continued into the next generation through William Jr.'s son, James Stillman Rockefeller,
who had a rather glamorous start to his career, winning an Olympic gold medal in rowing at the 1924 Paris Games.
From sporting hero to executive,
he transitioned into a successful business career, eventually becoming chairman of National City Bank. Through a series of later mergers, this institution forms a key part of what we know today as Citigroup. It just underscores how the wealth and influence extended far beyond John D. Sr.'s immediate life.
Which brings us to part 4. John D. Rockefeller Jr., from controversy to philanthropy. This is where the family attempts a radical course correct, a shift from controlling oil to formalizing immense large-scale giving.
By the time Standard Oil was dismantled in 1911, John D. Sr. was already in his 70s. He had already begun handing over control to his only son, John Jr., as early as the 1900s.
And John Jr., born in 1874, was remarkably different from his father. Where John Sr. was ruthless, John Jr. was shy and reserved. He was far more interested in culture, history, and had a much firmer religious conviction.
A lifelong teetotaler, aligned with his Baptist upbringing. And interestingly, this conviction led him to a pretty unexpected political stance on prohibition. He actually became critical of it.
Why, if he was a teetotaler?
Not because he supported drinking, but because he observed that the ban was simply creating massive, escalating lawlessness across America. It was generating more chaos than it solved.
Interesting. So John Jr.'s first major task was managing the post-breakup branding nightmare.
It was. One of the largest successor branches, Standard Oil of New Jersey, needed to shed that negative monopoly reputation.
And this is where modern marketing was born. They created the name ESSO.
ESSO, a brilliant marketing ploy, right? Based on the phonetic rendering of the initials S and O. This was purely strategic, designed to move the new company away from the poisoned Standard Oil brand.
But before he could fully establish this new era of respectability, he was thrust into a massive controversy that threatened to ruin the family name forever.
The Colorado Coal War.
And the Ludlow Massacre.
This conflict began because John D. Sr. had helped refinance the Colorado Fuel and Iron Company, or CF&I, giving the Rockefellers a large stake in coal mines in the Rocky Mountains.
And in the autumn of 1913, a huge strike erupted, over 10,000 workers targeting CF&I.
The conditions were just horrific: collapsing mines, child labor, and a scandalous lack of compensation for families whose workers died on the job. The workers were demanding union recognition and basic safety standards.
And John Jr., as the public face of the company, took a hard-line anti-unions. He refused.
He did. He used his financial power to support breaking the strike. Ignoring repeated warnings about the terrible condition, the conflict escalated violently,
culminating tragic on April 20, 1914, in the Ludlow Massacre.
The National Guard, deployed at the company's request, fired upon a tent colony of striking miners and their families. 21 people were killed, including women and children, many of whom suffocated when their tents were set on fire.
The reputational damage was just instantaneous and catastrophic. John Jr. was publicly vilified.
And even though the Colorado governor technically gave the order for the National Guard deployment, public and historical blame fell squarely on Rockefeller for his failure to intervene.
He was called to testify before Congress in 19, and it's a widely held view that much of the massive, highly visible philanthropy that followed was strategically designed to repair the family.
This move toward formal, organized giving was part of a broader Gilded Age trend. You had Andrew Carnegie promoting the gospel of wealth, the idea that the rich had a moral imperative to give away their fortunes.
And the Rockefellers fully embraced this, often rooting it in their deep Baptist faith.
The formal vehicle for this was the Rockefeller Foundation, which was officially established in May 1913, just months before the coal strike, really.
But the idea had been around.
Oh, yeah. John D. Sr. had set aside tens of millions of dollars worth of Standard Oil shares as the initial endowment basis way back in 1901. John Jr. served as its chairman from 1917, ensuring its activities were globally expansive, rooted in scientific.
And the impact was immediate and long-lasting. They provided crucial financing for university scientific research, especially in medicine, health, and supported organizations like the Red Cross.
But what really distinguished the Rockefeller Foundation was its international scope. This wasn't just American charity. They extended financing to develop hospitals in China and supported agricultural development in Mexico after its revolution.
They even branched into cultural architecture overseas, contributing significantly to the building of Senate House, that massive Art Deco building on the University of London.
It established an institutional legacy that extended far beyond the oil fields, making the Rockefeller name synonymous with global health and science.
And as the international oil industry began to shift toward the Middle East and Venezuela, John Jr.'s focus pivoted away from oil operations entirely and toward prestige real estate, particularly in Manhattan. This is the story of Part 5, the built legacy in Manhattan and beyond.
John Jr.'s commitment to New York's built environment was immense. Take the Riverside Church in Morningside Heights. The Rockefellers had been major Northern Baptist patrons since the 1870s.
And John Jr. donated $1 million to construct this massive new church around 1990.
Completed in 1930, it was built in the style of a miniature cathedral, famous for its impressive 74-bell carillon, a truly rare and costly feature.
He also invested philanthropically in housing, notably the Dunbar Apartments in Harlem during the Harlem Renaissance.
Right, an iconic complex explicitly designed for African-American residents, which addressed a critical need for quality housing at the time.
But all of this architectural patronage is completely eclipsed by the complex he envisioned in Midtown Manhattan, Rockefeller.
The story of Rockefeller Center is as much about financial determination as architecture. In 1928, at the height of the Roaring Twenties skyscraper craze, Rockefeller acquired this huge 6-block plot of land from Columbia University.
And then October 1929, Wall Street cracked. The Great Depression, ambitious projects across the country were immediately canceled.
But the fabulously wealthy Rockefellers pressed ahead. And this wasn't just stubbornness, it was financial genius. By building through the bottom of the Depression, land and labor were significantly,
which allowed them to secure prime tenants at favorable rates precisely because other new skyscrapers were struggling to fill their space.
The centerpiece was 30 Rockefeller Plaza, 30 Rock. Completed in 1933, it was 850 feet high, 66 floors, instantly one of New York's tallest structures.
And John Jr., a fan of Art Deco, ensured the entire complex was designed in that bold, forward-looking style, symbolizing
The complex also includes Radio City Music Hall, which opened in 1932. At the time, it was the world's largest 4-tier indoor auditorium.
And this entire development highlights the family's deep shift into high finance. A key early tenant for 30 Rock was General Electric, a major client of Chase National Bank.
And John Jr. was the largest shareholder of the Equitable Trust Company, which he orchestrated into merging with Chase National Bank in 1930. This cemented the family's financial position.
And the roots of Chase National are just incredibly deep. They trace all the way back to 1799. When Aaron Burr,
the same Aaron Burr who famously killed Alexander Hamilton in a duel,
That's the one. He established the Manhattan Company. Chase National was formed later, and through John Jr.'s involvement, became inextricably linked to America's most powerful.
Today, through subsequent mergers, Chase Bank is one of the world's largest, with assets over $3 trillion. John Jr.'s 1930 merger connected the oil dynasty's fortunes to the very foundation of American finance.
Okay, moving on, we turn to the figure who ensured the Rockefeller name would be immortalized in cultural, rather than purely financial, history. Abby Aldrich Rockefeller. This is part 6, Abby Rockefeller and Cultural Patriot.
Abby Aldrich Rockefeller, born in 1874, married John D. Jr. in 1901. And crucially, she brought her own pedigree. Her father was Nelson Wilmeth Aldrich, a leading Republican senator from Rhode Island. She came from a background of entrenched political power.
She spent her 20s traveling extensively and developed this extremely keen eye for art. She became a formidable collector.
Focusing on contemporary American painters alongside the radical European masters of the age, Impressionists, Expressionists, and Cubists. She was collecting works by artists like Picasso, Matisse, and Van Gogh.
She saw the future of art where others just saw controversy. And she didn't just collect quietly. She became the driving force behind establishing the Museum of Modern Art, MoMA, on Fifth Avenue.
And what's truly remarkable is the timing. MoMA opened in November 1929, just as the city and the nation were reeling from the Wall Street crash.
In the midst of unprecedented financial turmoil, Abby pushed forward this major investment in abstract and modern art, which was still considered fringe by many wealthy collectors.
That vision is MoMA's foundation. It remains one of the greatest art museums globally. It's a testament to her willingness to take a massive risk on cultural relevance.
Her cultural interests weren't limited to modernism, though. She and John Jr. were also deeply invested in historical preservation, specifically the massive restoration of colonial Williamsburg.
Williamsburg is deeply historic. It was founded in 1632, eventually superseding Jamestown as the colonial capital. By the 20th century, many of the original buildings were dilapidated.
So in the 1920s, John Jr. and Abby joined a massive effort to finance the restoration and recreation of homes, developing it into a national historic landmark and a living...
Right, complete with costume residence. However, the sources do note the criticism that followed. Some critics argued that colonial Williamsburg commercialized and sanitized the past, portraying a glossy, idealized version of 18th century life, rather than accurately reflecting the harsh realities of colonial existence and enslavement.
That tension between creating an idealized cultural legacy and confronting historical realities is a theme running through all great dynasties. And as the family solidified its place in culture, the focus moved to the next generation, whose influence shifted away from monolithic business to direct politics. This is part 7, the third generation in politics and global affairs.
The third generation, born around the turn of the century, faced a new reality. Like the Vanderbilts before them, the sheer scale of the family's wealth had begun to dilute across a growing number of descendants.
The singular focused dynamism of John D. Sr.'s wealth quest just wasn't replicated.
It couldn't be. John D. Rockefeller III, born in 1906, was destined for business, serving on the board of dozens of companies by age 23. His rise was slowed simply because his father lived until 1960.
So John III carved out his own path in diplomacy and global affairs.
He did. Following WWII in 1951, he served as an economic attaché during the negotiations for the Treaty of San Francisco. His role was crucial in ensuring the stability of the post-war Japanese economy and cementing U.S. ties.
But his most profound institutional legacy is the founding of the Population Council in
an NGO created to address the growing global problem of overpopulation. This was remarkably proactive. He correctly anticipated the immense global population boom that saw numbers soar from 2.5 billion to well over 6 billion by the end of the century.
This showed the third generation's move from focusing on profit margins to focusing on massive global social challenges. His younger brother, Nelson Rockefeller, born in 1908, is the most famous politician the family ever.
He had a challenging start, struggling with undiagnosed dyslexia. Despite this, he quickly entered the family business in the 1930s. His key role was managing Creole Petroleum Corporation, a subsidiary of Standard Oil of New Jersey, dedicated to exploiting Venezuela's vast oil.
And that business involvement became his conduit into politics.
It did. During World War II, Nelson grew deeply concerned about the spread of Nazi sympathies in South American nations like Argentina. President Roosevelt recognized his expertise and appointed Nelson to head the office of the Coordinator of Inter-American Affairs in 1940.
So he spent the next decade cultivating better political and economic ties between the U.S. and Latin America.
He did. He used his connections and immense family wealth to launch a career in frontline politics, eventually serving as Undersecretary of Health, Education, and Welfare under President Eisenhower, but his defining role began in New York.
He won the gubernatorial election in 1958 and secured re-election 3 times, serving a remarkable 4 years.
Which made him the longest-serving governor of New York, excluding the colonial-era George Clinton. He was not just a politician, he was a revolutionary state builder.
He treated New York State like a massive corporation that needed radical modernization.
Colossal state-building projects. The expansion of the SUNY and CUNY university systems, immense transportation and infrastructure projects. He defined modern New York.
He was a moderate, big-tent Republican, which led him to run unsuccessfully for the presidential nomination times.
Right, often seen as too liberal for the conservative wing of the party. But his chance at the highest national office came unexpectedly in 1974. Following Nixon's resignation, Vice President Gerald Ford became president and needed a new VP.
And Ford chose Rockefeller.
He did, but his 2-year tenure was fraught with tension. The sheer scale of his family wealth and his refusal to back away from his unpopular support for the Vietnam War alienated many in his own party.
And this political friction culminated in 1976. Senior Republicans convinced President Ford to drop Rockefeller from the re-election ticket in favor of Bob Dole,
making Nelson Rockefeller the most recent incumbent vice president to be dropped from a re-election campaign, a surprising and abrupt end to his national political career.
And before Nelson's political ascent, his branch of the family was struck by one of the most persistent and tragic mysteries in the family history:
the disappearance of his son, Michael Rockefeller, during an expedition in 1960.
Michael was an anthropologist, joining a Harvard expedition to Dutch New Guinea, focusing on indigenous groups who still lived in Neolithic.
He was fascinated by Asmat art and returned to the area. On November 17, 1961, his pontoon boat overturned, leaving him and a Dutch anthropologist stranded in rough water.
After floating for a day and a half, Michael made a fateful decision. He told his companion he was going to swim for the shore, which was nearly 10 miles away.
He was never seen again.
And despite extensive searches and these persistent, dramatic claims of capture and even cannibalism by local tribes.
A theory that's become a fixture of travel lore. But the overwhelming likelihood, given the distance, the exhaustion, the strong oceanic current, is that Michael Rockefeller simply drowned before reaching the coast. A sad, indelible footnote.
That brings us to our final discussion, Part 8, continuing the legacy and modern relevance. The philanthropic structure built by John D. Sr. and Jr. has evolved in fascinating ways.
The Rockefeller Foundation remains one of the largest philanthropic endowment funds globally, with family members still on the board. But the evolution of their values is starkly visible today.
We have to note the dramatic full circle moment. The foundation recently decided to divest all of its oil investments, explicitly citing environmental.
This means selling stakes in companies like ExxonMobil, which are direct successors of the very corporation that created the family's original wealth. It's an almost unbelievable paradigm.
A fortune built on oil is now being dedicated, in part, to mitigating the effects of oil dependence.
It perfectly illustrates the shift in generational priorities.
And the Rockefeller Brothers Fund, established in 1940 by Nelson and his sibling, is also highly.
It funded major academic studies on U.S. political and social difficulties, and it was the main driver behind the preservation of Grand Teton National Park in Wyoming, donating significant private lands back to the federal government.
As the generations progressed, we see the expected dilution of central control. The fourth generation were the first to truly step down the rung of American life.
But they still produced prominent figures. The most notable is John D. Rockefeller V, known as Jay. He made a huge political break by moving to West Virginia and joining the Democratic Party.
A sharp contrast to the family's traditional Republican alignment. And Jay successfully served as governor and then as a powerful U.S. senator for 3 decades, until 20.
Other descendants have played roles in journalism, academia, and environmental causes. Rodman Rockefeller was a business lobbyist involved in the development of NAFTA in 1994, showing the continued reach into high-level policy.
Today, the family rarely appears on rich lists as individuals, simply because the wealth is so decentralized. They sold their main stake in the iconic Rockefeller Center in 2000.
Yet collectively, the Rockefellers remain multi-billionaire, their influence shifting from direct control of oil wells to institutional power over banks, foundations, and political office.
So in summary, the story is one of unprecedented volatility and perfect timing. The family vaulted from a struggling grandfather and a snake oil-selling, bigamous father to unimaginable wealth in a single generation.
John D. Sr.'s entry into oil was perfectly timed, leveraging the decline of whale oil and the superiority of kerosene just as the industrial and transport revolutions took off.
And 3 generations fundamentally shaped modern America. J.D. Sr. with the oil monopoly, J.D. Jr. defining Manhattan's built environment and institutional philanthropy, and Nelson achieving massive political power as New York's governor and U.S.
Few families have achieved such success or generated such lasting controversy. And that brings us to our final provocative thought for you to consider.
Reflecting on the Gilded Age and that 1911 Supreme Court ruling, we see the core tension of massive wealth. Standard Oil was incredibly efficient. It lowered prices. It perfected logistics. But the very concentration of its power was deemed inherently dangerous to democracy.
The family's rise was due to relentless opportunism, but their most enduring legacy, the MoMA, the Rockefeller Foundation, the National Park, are purely philanthropic, created long after the original money.
So when a dynasty's most famous original act is having its concentrated power legally dismantled, what does that imply about the necessary limits of private enterprise? Should the success of a business ultimately be judged by its efficiency and its ability to deliver cheap product to consumer, or by the simple undemocratic threat posed by its power?
It's a question about corporate scale that remains fiercely relevant today.